Hey, everybody. Welcome back to part two of our Stoic Story episode. If you did not listen to last week, Benny kind of interviewed me as we went through my Stoic journey and how I discovered Stoicism. And this week, I will be doing the same for Benny. So we're going to switch roles here, and I will be interviewing him to get his perspective on not only how he discovered Stoicism, but his journey through it so far. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with us, and let's get started.
The Via Stoica podcast with Brendan and Benny. Powered by viastoica.com, your home for coaching, workshops, quotes, and Stoic content that inspires.
Right at the onset, though, Benny, let's just kick it off with if you could give us your kind of understanding or summary of what Stoicism is.
Okay, that's yes. For me, Stoicism is the practical and kind of spiritual philosophical guide to living the good life, which means peaceful, calm, and doing what you feel that you should do as an individual, but also in nature in general, right? With focus on virtue, on living in accordance with nature, on reason and logic, understanding your emotions, and just really becoming a complete human being. And instead of where we see a lot of these things that it's about shutting things off certain areas, no, it's really embracing the full essence of who you are. And we do that by understanding the world around us the best possible way, being curious, asking a lot of questions, and just being kind of like detectives or investigators of ourselves and the world. And that's really what I feel that the philosophy challenges me to do, to become wiser. And by wiser, I mean like to have that knowledge that I need to live better at every moment of my day. So that's how I see the philosophy. And then we can go to all the things that we read about the Stoics, the reason, logic, virtues, all of that stuff. I think that's core. But in the essence, for me, it just means finding the balance within yourself to live more peaceful and tranquil and a better life for yourself and the people around you.
Yeah, well said, Benny. And obviously, I am assuming you came to this conclusion after some years of studying. But I would like to understand first where you started. Where is kind of the first thing that brought Stoicism into your life?
So this is around 2018 when I was started when my marriage started to end. Well, it pretty much ended there. Long story, but I don't have to go in there. But it was a difficult time, And after that, I went into a little drinking spell, because obviously when you're dealing with difficult things, the first thing you want to do is numb yourself, and that's what I was doing as well. And I was kind of already putting myself into a certain. I felt like I'm very pragmatic and practical for myself. So even when dealing with that, I was already kind of having those steps, but you still have those moments where you kind of go for it. And I woke up one morning after no idea what happened the night before. I was in Dubai at the moment, and at the beginning we stayed in a hotel. She moved to some other place. I was still in a hotel because I didn't know where to go. And I woke up, I looked, the room was a mess. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was like, this is not gonna be who I am, right? This is not gonna be me. So that's where I figured I've got to do something else. And one of my close friends there, he was an avid reader, and I made some rules. Maybe this sounds like Jordan Peterson a little bit too much. Make your bed, all that stuff. Get your act together. Make sure that you eat right, treat yourself good, go exercise, don't drink anymore. That was my number one rules. No alcohol because it's just not good for myself. Read more. Invest time in yourself, and that's where I started reading a lot more science fiction books. All of these kind of things. And at one point, we were talking, my friend and I diagnosed myself with an existential crisis. I was going through a lot more, I realize now, but at that moment, it felt like fine to give myself a label, like, hey, this is what you're dealing with. And I read this book by Olson. Oh, I can't remember the first name, but it was called Introduction into Existentialism. And he had like Camus, with absurdism. He had Sartre with existentialism, the Epicureans, but also the Stoics. And I think that was the first time that I actually recognized myself in a book or in a text or in something else that I was reading myself. I was like, this is me on so many different levels. So that's when I started to really see things, and I felt like there's immediate urge and motivation to read more about it and to really make it myself. It just felt like it was me. And that's when I started I just went nuts, in the books I read about in those books. And that was when that was before the pandemic. But I think I read like 40, 50 books a year because I was, living in Dubai and that life was not really mine. So I just went, work, lunch and read for 2 hours. The weekend, read in the morning, read in the afternoon. I was reading, and I'm not a very fast reader, but I was reading a lot. So, and that's where it really made sense to me. And I saw so many ways of applying this practically. And that's why, what you had with Ryan Holiday, I had with Marcus Aurelius, where just those quotes and just the fact, that he was he had so many struggles and he was torn inside that you could read it on paper. It felt like, hey, it's okay to be a mess, sometimes. It's okay to not have things all lined up and perfect and knowing what you're supposed to be doing. And also having that practical example there is like, this is, I can do something with this. And I saw some quick results, which is always useful. But just the fact that it aligned with who I was, that was really the big deal. For the big, what sold me to it. And from then on, I just went. I read everything like How to Be Stoic and all those the modern books as well. But I read all the. I have them here. Letters from Seneca. I have them all next. When I travel, I bring them with me, and I just love those things. I just read them. The history, like one quick example, I was reading Cicero, and I wrote about it, the Sword of Damocles, and that was a story I was told like in my when I was younger. And as I was reading it and I saw the name Damocles, I was like, wait a minute, I know this guy, So suddenly you read these things and it's like, wow, this is so cool. I felt like an explorer, right? I felt like an archaeologist who was just like finding this gem somewhere in these books and these texts. And for me, that was just so exciting. So just the history, the philosophy, and just really recognizing myself really, got me going.
Oh, that's very cool. So you it sounds like that, when you started reading about stoicism, it was an immediate acknowledgement that like this is me. And that
Oh,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
So you had at least because obviously the core tenet of philosophy is to know ourselves. So what was it about like where you're like, this is me that was resonating like with stoicism?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that this is also one of the reasons why Stoicism is making its move upwards. Like a lot of these other kind of, you have the mindfulness, you have these other help, the self-help books and these other ways of improving yourself. They often tend to go very spiritual and very in the like in the hoo-ha, and they kind of like and that's great if that's your way, but it's just not my way. I need practical stuff. I need pragmatism. I just need something that is grounded that I can focus on right here, right now. And, after reading Marcus Aurelius, I went to Epictetus. And Epictetus, I always call him like the verbal slap in the face that I needed, because I used to, I always felt like that victim role, like, oh, look at me, poor Benny, yeah. And I felt like Epictetus, like, she smacked me in the face and like, just, be normal. This happens to everyone. You're not special, right? And you're not someone who is supposed to have, be treated with velvet and gloves and all that stuff. No, you're just a human being and you're dealing with this and you can deal with it, right? You can do this. You can live life yeah, it's gonna be difficult, but the more you start sit here and sob and do nothing about it, it's not gonna get any easier. And that's when I read Epictetus, it was like, yeah, this is what I need. I just need kind of someone to tell me what it's like, not sugarcoat it, and just like go
Yeah.
do your best. And I still mess up many times, but now at least I'm thinking, okay, I can do better. I can do better, and that really drives me. So yeah, I think that was like the when I recognize myself is because they had a pragmatic outlook on life. And that's what I like about the philosophy.
Yeah, no, that makes it does have especially coming when you read some of Epictetus's words, I feel like there's very much a black and white. Like this is it and this is wrong. I think this is the way and this is not the way. And I do, and that's why like earlier when you asked, which it's funny that you said slap in the face because I feel like recently I've been needing a slap in the face. So when you're like, who's your, if you could sit down and have breakfast with someone, who would it be? I was like, Epictetus seems like a good one for me today. And that's what it is with the ancients. I feel like sometimes I'm more needing the guidance of Marcus, and sometimes I more need Epictetus, and sometimes Seneca comes along, and that's why it's nice that we have this idea of overall overarching stoicism, but like each sort of instructor or teacher in that school kind of delivers it in a slightly different way. So it's good to find your kind of mentor in this space. But what's that? So you said you read Marcus and then you started to read Epictetus. And how did that when you went from one to the other? Did you notice a difference or in how? Obviously, you said Epictetus, the verbal slap in the face, but what did that make you want to like? caused you to do to realize when it came to the differences between them?
Well, and one interesting. I think I really got affected by the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if anyone who's listening knows what it is. It's where when you start to learn something for the first time, you suddenly feel like you know everything about it because Stoicism. It's a virtue. I know everything now, right? So and then he's just like very confident. And then when I started picking up, Epictetus, and he calls, I like how he just goes and like, "Hi, you rats, he kind of like, well, you loser, you dummy," all of that stuff. That's what I needed, right? It's like, okay, and so there it was like, okay, you've got a long way to go, buddy. You think you know it all, and especially when you put your stuff online, people kind of challenge you, and that's what I needed, right? So that was the difference. With Marcus Aurelius, it has this historical kind of poetic sense to it, and Epictetus is really grounded. It's like he has conversations with, like for example, this one father comes from, I think, from Rome, from a city. He leaves his family because his daughter is ill. He's like, so you think you're a good father running away, and you think your wife or the caretaker, should they also run because they love her so much that they can't bear it? So it brings it really down to like the nitty gritty of like, what are our human roles? What do we need to do? What is being asked of us? What is our duty, right? And Marcus Aurelius talks about that as well. And that's why I like Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius above Seneca, because Seneca makes it all sound like, oh, look at me, I'm a nice, good writer. But it always asks me like, do you really mean this stuff? With Epictetus, because he didn't write it, you can say like, yes, he really meant this stuff.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, there's kind of that debate of with Seneca, and we can talk about that at a future time. But yeah, that's a good point, though. You're right. Like Seneca's obviously writing, I don't know, almost for an audience in a sense, whereas Epictetus is those are notes that someone else took from Epictetus's lecture. So, and that's important to keep that in mind. And I think that's another thing too when it comes to reading the ancients. It's good to remind yourself what this is. Like when you're reading Meditations, that's Marcus Aurelius, the easily, one of the most powerful people on earth, and definitely one of the most powerful people at the time, writing in his private journal. Versus Epictetus, when you're reading that, it's him speaking to a classroom or a lecture or some sort. And then Seneca, he's writing a letter to someone. So there's kind of like to keep that in mind when you're reading the ancients, to just remember like kind of the perspective, I guess, I think is super important. But yeah, as we continue on Benny's Stoic journey, what is there a moment as you're now absorbing this information, you're reading through these books, is there a moment for you where you really started to maybe like level up or really start to live and breathe this philosophy and not just read it?
I think that kind of you went gradually. When I started again, as I said, that kind of the practical applications were clear to me, like at work, but also in my daily life, and just so slowly but surely you start to recognize the pain points in your life, and then you start to connect them with Stoic practices, or how can I deal with them in a different way that works for me, right? Again, this is a very personal journey. But I think as I started writing as well, the blog, we started talking about it on X, where we met as well. And once you start to explain or talk to other people about it and they have questions, that's when you gotta also make sure that you know enough to do that, right? So that's where you gotta okay, ask yourself, where is my knowledge lacking? Do I know everything? Am I at the right level to go and teach this? But then also, like, if you are so sure and convinced that this is the right way to live, I always ask myself, even on the podcast here, is like, am I actually doing this right? It's really nice to talk about, memento mori, the negative visualization. As it's like, but I remember yesterday I was doing this and I should have done this. If I take my own words, my own advice. And you don't want to be too harsh on yourself, but when you talk about to level up, that has really helped me to even more like add it to my life, to make sure that in every moment I think, what would I do, according to the Stoics, what would Epictetus do, or what Marcus Aurelius do? But what do I need to do to live up to those? And sometimes these kind of moments, they sneak up on you when you have to, for example, with a friendship, when you have to say, okay, this is no longer working, but I don't want to, I don't want to. I'm a people pleaser as a from childhood, so I wanted people to like me. And at one point it's like, okay, but is this doing them justice or not? If I have this dishonest relationship with people. So the Stoic side of me then is like, okay, no, the virtuous side would be, this is not gonna work because I don't have that connection anymore. That's one example. But I think that's really helped me to make more difficult decisions and to to embrace them easier. For one quick example is like a few months ago, I was teaching the Stoic week in the Netherlands, which was a really cool experience, but also one that I would have been nervous about for months and months behind. And I think, before that, and I think even like if I would have been teaching there, I would have been just like shaking, and and now I went there with the attitude of like, okay, I'm gonna learn so much from this, and this is an experience that I need to undertake. And I was not nervous at all, and that surprised me. I stood there in front of the classroom, and there were 30 people asking me a lot of very difficult questions, and sometimes I had some help from the other guy who was teaching with Dennis. He does the things in the Netherlands. And I just stood there at certain points, and I thought, and I looked at myself, and I was like, wow, this is cool. I can learn in the moment. And I wasn't nervous at all. And that's where I felt like, yeah, the Stoic practice has really helped me to kind of detach my own ego and my own stuff from what I'm doing.
Oh, that's really cool. It's cool too that, obviously as for those that don't know Benny's background, he's an educator. So it's interesting that you went from obviously an educator just teaching in schools, but then, fast forward, now you're educating people on this thing that, was, I don't know, arguably a hobby, I guess, at one point. So that's super interesting. And I think that that's exactly how it went. I never considered that when we started doing the spaces and what you said earlier about being asked questions and being able to answer those questions. That was definitely a point when I started to understand the depth of knowledge that we have. Like when I hear you answer a question in the middle of a space, I'm like, okay, yeah, Benny knows his shit. So that's very cool, and I think that is important. And this is why I think it's so important, and just to kind of double down on the community side of things, to find a place to talk about this philosophy with people, even if it's just Twitter or something online. But like that was the biggest level up for me, was when we started doing those spaces. So that's interesting that you have the same sort of experience. But where was the something like, now we're on this journey. You're in the process of educating people. You're really deeply ingrained in Stoicism, and we're starting to really, obviously, we've started a company. We're having this lovely podcast about it. But where do you feel, from what you know about Stoicism now, what do you feel like Stoicism is lacking?
I think, obviously, we have a big responsibility now as well to make sure that we bring Stoicism to this day and age. You have things like modern Stoicism that do a lot of other great people who do great jobs at bringing it here and now. So I think that is an experience, that is a responsibility that we have, and I think sometimes one of the things that the negative side of modern day Stoicism is that it tends to be too dogmatic, where people just like, this is how Epictetus said it, right? And it's like, well, we don't really know what Epictetus said because, blah, blah. But, it is like, oh, this is what it should be. And I feel like we should be a little bit opener, because even back in the day, they had their discussions about what the right thing was. But for me, when I really think about it, is the emphasis for me on like things like love, not like the, oh, I'm in love, but the really deep love, the gratitude, and just, that sense of like the more focus on the positive sides. The Stoics want us to feel that eupatheia, the positive emotions, instead of the negative ones, the pathos, the pathe. So that's where we want to focus on. And I feel like that could be a little bit more brought up to the front. Also to change like maybe the reputation of Stoicism, but also show like, hey, this is a very positive philosophy for people, instead of like this staunchy kind of thing that people think it is.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense of bringing it, making it a more practical thing, approachable, digestible. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Penny. But as we kind of, I want to move into that idea of the practical application, right? You mentioned in the beginning that this kind of started in a place where you were going through a divorce. How did your study of Stoicism and applying those things to your life help you navigate that experience?
Mainly, it helped me kind of to keep aside what was happening on my ex partner's side and on my own side, and really focus on what I needed to deal with, not with what other people thought about me. Right, even with overcoming alcoholism and not drinking anymore, not looking at the opinion of other people, really focusing on what was best for me. And I think, mentioned earlier as well, that Stoicism had that view of being selfish. When you start on this journey of self improvement, you need to be selfish. You need to be maybe a little bit more selfish than normal, because you need to learn how to set boundaries, something that I didn't know how to do, right? Keep your own values in check, something that I used to kind of give away to just please other people. So you need to be a little bit more selfish at the beginning. And that's going to be difficult for the people around you. And that's where they're going to call you selfish. Like, oh, you used to do everything that I wanted and now you don't. Now you're a selfish person, right? But you need to build yourself up. And that's something that I found so helpful in Stoicism, that I was, taking that responsibility, doing, making that it showed me that, it's fine to not know everything, but you want to make progress and just doing it one step at a time and focusing on where I am right now and what do I need to do. And from that, as you start to build, now we have a podcast, now we have a website, and we reach people across the world, and we get a lot of feedback to say, just help me. So from that selfish attitude of trying to build myself, it got outward, right? So this is a perfect example of saying, like, okay, it does transpond to other people, and setting the right example helps. But that's something that I got the message from Stoicism is like, I need to work on my own stuff. Don't care about what the other people think. Those are externals. Let me just do what I need to be doing and question that as much as I can.
Oh, that's very interesting, Benny. And I think you just hit on something there. It's like this idea that Stoicism is a selfish philosophy or self-centered philosophy. Probably comes from people who are experiencing others becoming Stoics, not necessarily the opinion of the person going through the change, right? Because you're right on the outward level to your coworkers or your spouse or your people that you're with day to day. It might seem like you're going internal. You're not being as expressive, you're not doing as much for them and that sort of thing. So they can feel very selfish to others, but the idea is that we are being selfish so that it later benefits the whole. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And it's also, when you see other people living better and then you realize like, hey, I'm not doing that well, that also makes it even more difficult. So people can feel more resentful towards those people who start living
Mhm.
better. For example, with not drinking anymore, people's like, oh, I wish I could do that, right? It's like, oh, but you don't like I get a lot of like these oh, but you don't like to, co-party anymore, you don't like to do this anymore, or like some kind of I don't necessarily say that it's resentful, but they do have a certain undertone to it, right? Because people don't like to see other people doing better. That's just, what it generally is, unless they are those virtuous friends. That's why I'm saying, many times when someone, they say, oh, a true friend, you will see them when you are down on your dumps. I was like, nah, I don't think so. I think your true friend will be the one who is going to be genuinely cheering for you when you're actually winning, right? When you're actually achieving the things that you want to achieve. Because even when you're down on your luck, people will say, oh, you can, I'll be here for you. But it is also a selfish thing because you feel a little bit better about yourself when you know that someone else is doing a little bit worse than you. But if you can cheer for someone who is doing, and this is all arguably, what is better and what is worse, blah, blah. But if you feel like, hey, he's got a promotion, I didn't, but you're my best friend and I really think you deserve it. So that's awesome, right? I'm really happy for you. So I think that that's where you can really see the people who really care about you in those moments for more clearer.
Yeah. Wow, that's a wonderful perspective shift, which is another benefit of Stoicism. So if you're interested in that sort of benefits, let us know. Um, but no, that's great, Benny. Thank you for sharing that story with us. I do want to get into like a few kind of rapid fire questions. You want to do that?
Oh
Let's do
yeah,
it.
exciting.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
So first and foremost, what is the virtue that you need to work on most?
That's temperance for me with a lot of food and drinking and just overdoing things, even with the stoicism itself. I need to be more temperate in that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Who is your favorite ancient Stoic?
Epictetus.
Nice. And what about a modern Stoic? Who's someone you look up to?
Well, you, Brendan, let's start
Oh,
there.
come on,
But
come on. You're gonna make me blush.
modern day Stoic, I'd probably have to say my dad, but he doesn't know that he's a Stoic. But and some of my family members, but I would probably have to say there. But if I like the other people, like in the Stoic world, we don't really know them so well, like personally. So maybe I have to get back in.
Okay, great. And what was the most important book for you that you read?
That's probably the Enchiridion, the Handbook of Epictetus, but closely matched with no, I think no Meditations, because Meditations really showed me like the practical the practical application of Stoicism.
Very nice. How many times do you think you've read Meditations?
I've the book, I have it here. It's almost falling apart, but like cover to cover, at least 4 or 5 times. But like I've opened it so many times just to look for like a quote or anything, just so yeah, and yeah, so many times.
Great. And if you could kind of boil down Stoicism to one benefit, what is the one benefit that people receive from Stoicism?
Peaceful life.
Excellent. Well said. Well, This was
Okay.
I really enjoyed this, Benny. I mean, as much as, like you said, as much as we've talked on the phone and strategize and plan and talk about life and issues and problems and this and that, it's still nice to sit down like this and still learn a little bit more about each other. So I hope you guys, the listeners, enjoyed this. But before we do wrap it up, Benny, do you have any last words? Anything you want to say?
I just say, if anyone's listening, find your own philosophy of life, whether it's Stoicism, Buddhism, whatever, but find it, find your voice, and just live it, and find, that keep going at it, and keep improving and becoming a better person.
Exactly right. Yeah, it can only improve your life. Yeah, I don't know if you're gonna necessarily be a detriment to your life or take time away from you by trying to read more philosophy. It'll always improve you and always make you a little better, offering you new perspectives and new tools and things that you can do to kind of work through the challenges. But if you do have any questions or things that you are struggling with personally, or if our stories resonated with you personally, please reach out. We offer free consultations on viastoica.com, and we can do a free 30 minutes with you and kind of give you an idea of what Stoic coaching is to help you sort of navigate this journey of applying Stoicism into your day-to-day life, something that we have been trying to do, I'd say, for a few years, and it's become successful. So we'd like to help you guys do that as well if you're into that. So you can head to viastoica.com and click the free consultation button to sign up for those. But I'll pass it back over to you, Benny, and you can close us out.
Yeah, thanks for listening. And, again, what Brennan said as well, we liked these stories, and it's always good to talk about our personal journeys, and there's always something new to learn. So again, if you want to share your journey, you can also do that on viastoica.com or leave something in the comments here. But no, I really appreciate it. And thanks, Brennan, for the new insights that I got from you as well. And hope everybody had a great episode, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for listening to the Via Stoica podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and leaving a review. Your feedback will help us reach more like-minded people on the journey to self-improvement. If you want to get in touch with us or find more information, you can go to viastoica.com, your one-stop platform for all things Stoicism and living better. And remember, virtue is the only good.